I guess I'll put that on in a minute, maybe when everybody's back.
I enjoyed watching that video. Evan Moore, who's the redheaded guy, is now in our PhD program. And in the intervening year, his hair has gotten this long and his red beard is sticking up out here. He's in my graduate seminar right now. He comes in with this red mask over his red beard every day.
Good, good. Shall I play it again, or well, I guess we're supposed to start at 10:45. So shall I just wait?
Well, we have 1 minute.
Okay, I'll play. Yeah, it is only like a minute long.
It's not that long, so why don't you play it? People will figure it out as they come in, and when it runs once, then we'll turn it over to you as moderator. So it's not like you can't control it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you have the power.
Okay, just a sec.
So for those who are just coming in, Melissa is going to play a video that she made from last year's SRC. It just lasts about a minute. Just give us a glimpse of the old normal as distinct from the new.
It will make you miss meeting in person if you weren't already missing that, but this is what we have, right?
I'm guessing that she's gone to make it play, and she'll be back.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, guys. My computer splits the screen and like everybody just disappeared and I couldn't find you again. So hold on just 2 seconds. I'm so sorry. I have a share screen.
You're fine.
Just a second. Why does it do that? Okay, that's not going to work. I'm sorry. Can we just do it? We'll just do it like at the beginning of the business meeting or something. I apologize for that. It's so funny. It was just working 5 minutes ago. And now that everybody's looking at me, it doesn't work. Okay. So that's great.
It's lovely that you made it, and we'll definitely look at it later.
Okay. All right. So I guess I am the chair for this particular session. So I guess we'll go ahead and go forward. This session is on early modern poetics, and our first speaker, we're just going to go in order here. Our first speaker is Jesse Russell. He's from Georgia's Southwestern State University, and the title of his paper is Post-Marian Piety in Edmund Spenser's Faerie Queene, the Case of Belphoebe.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so it's great to be here among such accomplished scholars. And when I saw that there was a very famous Spencer scholar in my session, I about had a heart attack. So if I say anything incorrect about Spencer, please ignore that. So okay, for some time now, Renaissance scholars have turned their attention to the ways in which English Protestants refashioned the ancient Christian cult to the Blessed Virgin Mary into the veneration of the Virgin Queen Elizabeth Tudor. Indeed, the recognition of the creation of the cult of Elizabeth has become a commonplace in Renaissance studies. Foremost among these scholarly works is Helen Hackett's 1994 Virgin Mother, Maiden Queen, Elizabeth I, and the Cult of the Virgin Mary. Earlier in the 20th century, however, scholars such as E.C. Wilson and Dame Frances Yates had noted the irony that the English iconoclasts, while wrecking the image of the Queen of Heaven, shifted their adoration to the Queen of England. And the Protestants who destroyed the bejeweled and painted images of the Virgin Mary replaced them with another bejeweled and painted image of Elizabeth at court. Other critics have argued that the Anglican position held that sacred images were destroyed as popish superstition, while the sacred nature of the royal portrait image was to be maintained, and thus Elizabeth became the Virgin Queen of Protestantism, who came to be identified symbolically with the Virgin Mary. Finally, more recently, Gary Waller has written of the development and eventual near extinguishing of the devotion to the Virgin Mary in The Virgin Mary and Late Medieval and Early Modern English Literature and Popular Culture. Waller writes that traces and fades of the Virgin Mary that were felt so long after the so-called Middle Ages were supposedly over. Waller draws his inspiration from Julia Kristeva's comment that the Virgin Mary stands as one of the most powerful figures in the history of civilization, who serves as a combination of power and sorrow, sovereignty and unnameable. As an unnameable, Waller argues, the image of the Virgin Mary during early modern Britain still possesses a force that at times is explicitly, but more likely has to be inferred, forcing us to search for the non-saids and the unsayables as well as the saids. These traces and fades are central to Waller's thesis that the period termed early modern might as easily be called late medieval. Drawing from the work of these scholars, especially Gary Waller, I would like to argue that in Edmund Spenser's Faerie Queene, there are a number of venerable women who all represent, at least on one level, an impulse to Marian veneration in various forms. These figures all have literary and cultural precedents that are not necessarily Marian, i.e., two of Spenser's figures, Diana and Venus, exist as cultural phenomena before the Virgin Mary. However, one of their sources is the continuation of Marian piety in muted and mutated form. Reading Spenser's work through a critical lens that perceives the persistence of the impulse toward Marian devotion, even amidst strongly Protestant cultural artifacts, allows us to grasp the complexity and richness of not only Spenser's religious thought, but that of many Elizabethan thinkers who could not escape the elements of repressed English Catholicism. For the purpose of my brief treatment, I would like to focus exclusively on the figure of Belphoebe, the virgin huntress who serves as a type of Elizabeth Tudor's chastity. One of the many things the Faerie Queene is about is Elizabeth Tudor. While critics might debate the extent to which the various figures in the poem idealize and inspire and/or admonish and even ridicule Elizabeth, there is no question that a number of figures in the poem represent Elizabeth, as Spenser himself instructs in the proem to Book 5. In this proem, Spenser asks Sir Walter Raleigh, the delicious poet, to lend Spenser the image of Cynthia for Spenser's own depiction of Elizabeth, who will have the opportunity to see herself in the mirror of the Faerie Queene. Now, any passages I read from the Faerie Queene, I will probably mispronounce most of the words, but I'll say it in contemporary English as best I can. Nay, let his fairest Cynthia refuse, and mirrors more than one herself to see, but either Gloriana let her choose, or in Belphoebe fashioned to be. In the one her rule, in the other her rare chastity. Certainly there are classical and other pre-Christian precedents of virgin goddesses and queens. Nonetheless, it would be difficult to see that Spencer's own Elizabeth milieu, whether Puritan, likely crypto-Catholic, or what would later be called in history Anglican, would not think of the image of the Virgin Mary, whom their ancestors had venerated as a virgin queen, and an ideal type for imitation by men and women alike for over a millennium. Indeed, an individual analysis of these types, focusing here on Belphoebe, will reveal the presence of strong Marian echoes. Spencer informs us that Belphoebe is representative of an idealized version of Queen Elizabeth's virginity. And in this idealization, there are strong echoes of earlier depictions of the Virgin Mary. Upon first glance, however, it might appear that Belphoebe is a pagan figure. There is no question that the primary literary source for Belphoebe is the Roman goddess Diana. Like Diana, Belphoebe is a virgin huntress who chases wild beasts with her arrows keen. However, Spencer does place Belphoebe within an explicitly Christian framework. It is providence heavenly, which passeth living thought, and doth for wretched men's relief make way, that puts Belphoebe in the squire's path. Moreover, Belphoebe attends the squire in a manner highly redolent of devotional depictions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Encountering the wounded squire, Belphoebe, that lady bright, attends to the wounded young man after she grew full of soft passion and unwonted smart, the point of pity pierced through her tender heart. She bows down to the squire meekly and casts to comfort him with busy pain. Belphoebe does heal him with herbs. However, it is not merely these medicinal or even magic herbs that the chaste woman employs in her revival of the squire. Rather, Spencer describes her in very Marian language, which even seems to echo the Ave Maria, as the goodly maid full of divinities and gifts of heavenly grace. The squire's response to Belphoebe further is highly redolent of language drawn from the gospel depictions of the Blessed Virgin Mary, as well as traditional prayers to the Virgin, asking for her cure and protection. Upon awakening from his illness and seeing the majestic Belphoebe, the squire announces, "Mercy, dear Lord, what grace is this, that thou hast showed to me, sinful wight, to send thine angel from her bower of bliss, to comfort me in my distressed plight. Angel or goddess, do I call thee right?" The squire further explains that Belphoebe has taken him from darkness and returned to light, and offers to kiss her blessed feet. Belphoebe's humble response to the squire's praises further echoes Marian language. Blessing, she sees that she is neither a goddess. She says that she is neither a goddess or angel, but the maid and daughter of a woody nymph, whose job is to seek the safety and aid of the squire, as well as to secure wretched wights, whom she finds captive in the forest. This humble, self-effacing language, not usually found on the lips of classical goddesses, echoes that of the famous words of Mary in the Gospel of Luke, in which she tells the angel Gabriel, after hearing of miraculous conception of Christ in her womb, "Behold, the servant of the Lord, be it done to me according to thy word." Even the description of the radiance of Belphoebe's face has a Marian undercurrent. Wounded by an unwary dart which did rebound from Belphoebe's fair eyes and gracious countenance, the squire is enthralled by this heavenly maid who attends to his wounds and his life released. She has a celestial hue from which reigns heavenly light, inspires him to serve in a chaste manner. Certainly such language is Petrarchan and Dantean, but the image of the divine intercessor and mediatrix of grace ultimately, even in Petrarch and Dante, has its roots in Marian devotion. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who appears in Dante's Paradiso, one of the most important Mariologists of the medieval period, writes of the Virgin Mary as an aqueduct and precious conduit through which the streams of heavenly grace flow from Christ, the living fountain and source of the grace. Belphoebe is not simply an echo of Diana and other classical deities. With her humility, chastity, and character as a mediatrix of divine beauty and grace, she is a trace of earlier veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Moreover, addressing his female readers, Spencer notes that Belphoebe, like the Virgin Mary, was in previous generations to be an example of virginity. Again, Belphoebe, despite her allegorical pagan birth, is made by eternal God in his almighty power to make example of his heavenly grace. Indeed, we learn that it is God who had originally caused the birth of Belphoebe, and in paradise Wilhelm did plant his flower. It appears that Belphoebe's native place is heaven, from which God fetched her and put her on earth in order that mortal men her glory should admire. and in gentle lady's breast of bounteous race of womankind at fairest flower doth spire, and beareth fruit of honor in all chaste desire. Spenser further addresses the fair imps of beauty, who should model themselves after Belphoebe's chastity and virtue virginal. For their heads will be crowned with heavenly coronal, such as the angels wear before God's tribunal. Belphoebe, the fell virgin, should serve as an ensample from which they should frame themselves, for Belphoebe is a figure whom in perfect love and spotless fame of chastity none living may compare. Finally, as an exemplar, Belphoebe standeth in the highest stair of the honorable stair of the honorable stage of womanhood, in order that ladies all may follow her example deed. Belphoebe's virtues include steadfast chastity, being courteous and kind. She is further tempered with grace and goodly modesty. In fact, her virtues were so pronounced that they increased the praise of womankind, and all of her virtues made in her made a perfect complement. Such language of an idealized woman, even when filtered through Italian and French Renaissance poetry, is highly Marian. Spenser's fellow countrywoman, Julian of Norwich, in her Revelations of Divine Love, writes that Mary's humility overpasses all creatures. In the Mirror of Our Lady, we hear of an extended description of Virgin Mary. O Mary, Virgin most pure and most fruitful mother, thou art the same thing, for so and such were thou in the sight of God, endlessly ere thou were made, and afterward of the aforesaid pure and clean elements. Thou hadst the matter of thy blessed body, and such wert thou unmade before God, before thy making, as thou hadst deserved to be afterward. And therefore thou were much more excellent endlessly in the sight of God, to his most joy above all creatures that were to be made. Finally, Belphoebe's birth has echoes of gospel depictions of the Virgin Mary. We learn that Belphoebe is not noble in her birth because of her education, but because in her birth the heavens so favorable were and free, and the heavens on her poured forth of plenteous horn a host of virtues. Like medieval and patristic discussion of the Immaculate Conception, Belphoebe is a virgin born and bred pure and spotted from all loathly crime, that is, ingenerate and fleshly slime. She is born from Chrysogone, daughter of Amphisia, who gives birth to Belphoebe and her sister, who both share the very Marian-sounding heritage of all celestial grace, via the heaven's fruitful ray. This scene, although present in classical sources such as the story of the impregnation of Leucothoe by the sun in Ovid's Metamorphoses, is nonetheless highly redolent of the story of the birth of Christ and the Virgin Mary. As the angel Gabriel tells the Virgin in the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke, the Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, and the power of the Most High shall overshadow thee. Therefore also that holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. The parallel between the Gospel description of the virgin birth and the near miraculous conception of Belphoebe does not suggest that Edmund Spenser was a Catholic or that he was sympathetic to the Catholic cause. Although Catherine Walls, riffing on Eamon Duffy's thesis in The Stripping of the Altars, convincingly argues in a recent work that Spenser was sympathetic to some of the rituals of Catholicism. In many ways, intellectual history has gone out of fashion. Nonetheless, grand cultural and mythological narratives about the history of cultural artifacts, mythological archetypes, and religious figures are indeed exciting, and in some cases remain worthy of study. On the other hand, the complexity and cunning of history often makes such narratives appear, in the final analysis, all too limited. Nonetheless, as many Renaissance scholars have noted, veneration of the Virgin Mary, at least the impulse toward veneration of the Holy Virgin, did continue among many post-Reformation English men and women. And one of the most unlikely fertile places for the discovery of such an impulse is in the work of Edmund Spenser. Despite elements of marked and even virulent anti-Catholicism in his work, Edmund Spenser's oeuvre nonetheless includes residual elements of Catholic piety and devotion. One of these elements is the veneration of Blessed Virgin Mary, an ancient Christian practice that can gain intensity in the late Middle Ages, only to be slowly snuffed out by the hungry bonfires of the Reformation. Spenser's virgin queens, adored mothers, beloved females, and even warrior princesses all contain traces and echoes of earlier Marian devotion.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Jesse. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Melissa?
Melissa just texted her computer is
Frozen.
freezing on her end. There's something with the audio.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I heard the text and
This is why we have all the back channels open. If you
Yeah.
see me texting, I'm not playing games over there on the phone.
Okay, well, I'll stand in for a sec,
Okay.
and then we can go ahead. So our next presenter is Robin, Robert Lanier Reed of Emory and Henry College, and his paper is titled Unfinished Epics, Spenser's Faerie Queen, Shakespeare's Henriade, and the Mystic Plenum. So Robin?
Yes.
So sorry about that, by the way. I'm back.
That's okay.
I'm having problems with my screen view and you guys keep disappearing, but we're good now.
We're good now. We're ready for Robin. Thank you, dear.
All right. I just want to thank very much the leaders of the conference for putting together such a wonderful Zoom meeting. I wish we could all be together as we used to be, but it just is not that way. And I was very impressed with the insertion last night of those really deep and meaningful scholarship reports. I think that was just a terrific idea. So here's my effort on unfinished epics, whether Spenser and Shakespeare were able to create the greatest of genres, the epic. An epic source may seem simple. One astonishing singer, preferably blind, like Homer and Milton. But in fact, and this is point number one about epic, epic is a cultural collective. Whether it's an ancient song versified to aid a singer's memory, or a capacious modern novel like that of Tolstoy, Joyce, George Eliot, or a related novel series like those of Austen, Mann, James, Proust, Morrison, Atwood, each singer's word magic and grand vision draws on that of many others. It's the cumulative saga of an entire culture. Point number two, epic is an ultimate story, a supreme fiction, says Wallace Stevens. This glorified chronicle of catastrophe uses high language and taut form to enforce one of the two great themes of life, either the horrors of warfare and grappling with cultural monsters, or the hopeful homecoming that grows eventually into a quest for moral perfection. Point number three, central to epic is a special hero who tests cultural values and shapes a national conscience by persisting through many failures, aided by a watchful deity or a thoughtful guide. One of the most ambitious epics is Spenser's Faerie Queen, but it's just half an epic, the down-going first half. Its magnificent avatars, Queen Gloriana and the future king, Arthur, tease out the dream of a supreme fiction, but in the 6 completed legends, these mythic figures are not yet united, indeed have hardly met, nor have they yet faced God's throne, which is the end point of Spenser's major poems. An equally ambitious national epic is Shakespeare's Henriade, but with a more populist hero. Prince Hal engages with all social classes as he grows into Henry V. In onstage trafficking with warriors and idlers, Hal is more present than Gloriana, who acts only in subtypes, and he is more self-consciously aware than Arthur. Hal chides himself for drinking small beer with commoners while parrying Falstaff's deflations, as when he calls Hal, "Thou whoreson mad compound of majesty." Can a prince find ideal kingship beside Falstaff, among smells of sack and urine, which Hal openly notes, and even magnifying the vulgarity, in flightings with the old rogue. We're charmed by Hal's clever engagement, but his stature as an epic avatar is undercut, necessitating Shakespeare's further testings of sovereignty in a kaleidoscope of history, comedy, tragedy, romance. So we ask, to what degree was the Faerie Queen or the Henriade a finished epic? Part 1, Spenser's Reformation epic. Planned as a comprehensive allegory of moral perfection, Spenser's poem is clearly unfinished. Of 12 promised legends, only 6 are complete, the last 3 with loose ends. Some have questioned the Faerie Queen's epic stature for lacking a full-scale war, favoring one-on-one combats. But this reading ignores the allegory's spectacular range of moral conflict. Book 1's apocalyptic monsters, or Goglio, despair, dragon, are spiritual foes who greatly surpass the enemies of Ariosto's and Tasso's crusading epics. Book 2, descending to the complementary realm of immanence, tackles the vast legions of sin managed by Mammon, Meleager, and Acrasia. And subsequent books add 4 deepening levels to the soul's war as the moral arena narrows from Book 1's transcendent scale to the sensory realm of books 5 and 6. Our grievous loss is not seeing Spenser depict the 6 final modes of moral warfare in books 7 through 12, which I believe would reverse the poem's mythic descent by rising to the ultimate war promised by Revelation, partly inscribed by Blake. Others stress Spenser's use of kidnapped romance, since 3 legends have multiple romance plots that they say diffuse the epic quest. C.S. Lewis, to hedge his bets, calls the poem a romance epic, noting its debt to Boiardo, Ariosto, and Tasso. And the Spenser Encyclopedia goes further, giving no entry on epic, but one of its longest, 10 giant pages on romance. The Faerie Queen's generic riddle provoked Northrop Frye's masterwork, Anatomy of Criticism, which affirms the poem's status as a national and as an encyclopedic epic. Spenser compares himself to Homer and Virgil and to Ariosto and Tasso, but he vows to overgo Ariosto. With the ribald tale of old Malbecco watching his wife Helenor with satyrs, Spenser beats Ariosto at his own risque game, but Spenser's real superiority is in the profundity of his holistic design, firmly controlling the eroticism within a passional allegory at the heart of his Summa Poetica. Thus, Spenser's poem is epic not only in massive size, longer than Paradise Lost, the Aeneid, and Jerusalem Liberated combined, but in mirroring the crises and glories of Elizabeth's reign in a brilliantly schematic moral allegory. This well-crafted edifice has a tightly structured symbolic plot. Instead of Ariosto's playful toying with a lust-maddened hero, Orlando Furioso, Spenser's epic focuses on uniting its 2 iconic figures, a sapient virgin queen and a mythic prince. The importance of their union is implied by their increasing separation in the 6 completed legends. Each legend has the same archetypal form. Cantos 1 through 6 descend into blind materialism and divorce. Then a Christ-like figure defeats a materialist titan to enable ascent in Cantos 7 through 12 to spiritual vision and reunion. We must assume this pattern in the epic as a whole. In books 1 through 6, Arthur descends into confused separation from the Faerie Queen, whose essence remains hidden. The Virgin Queen, for her part, endures a similar descent as her dark double, the treacherous Duessa, is exposed in 3 stages: her intellective duplicity in books 1 and 2, her passional disruption in books 3 and 4, her literal sensory treason in book 5, matched by sensory disfiguring of Elizabeth's courtiers in book 6. Elsewhere, I've suggested the probable virtues of the missing legends, 6 ascending stages of moral perfection, precisely reversing the descent in books 1 through 6. If Spencer had lived to complete the poem, it would affirm Britain's highest values in a schematic series of 12 quests, a multi-level allegory, historical and political, moral and spiritual, to form a monumental teaching poem for England's leaders, trained in the 12 moral virtues as Aristotle hath devised. The dynamic scope of this morality surpasses the ancient epics in thematic power, the Odyssey's more incidental allegorizing of heroic wisdom, the Aeneid's allegory of stoic communal duty restraining passion. Spencer's Faerie Queene encloses these antique moralities, their ideological myths and pagan gods, in forms that provide a doorway to Christianity. Part 2, Shakespeare's staged epic. A similar heroic spectacle arousing patriotic pride and serving as a touchstone of values forms on Shakespeare's stage a very different epic, the Henriade. The great tetralogy of 1596 to 99 shows Prince Hal interacting with British folk at all social levels as he becomes an ideal monarch. Portraying him as, quote, a mirror of all Christian kings, unquote, required deep revision of popular anecdotes. Hal's tavern-haunting youth is recast as a pleasant pretense to gain oneness with commoners, learning to manage them. His heroism at Shrewsbury, a striking contrast to Falstaff's indulgence, Hotspur's rashness, King Henry's timid prudence, is made to atone for his father's usurpation. When he ascends the throne as Henry V, a theatrical acumen assists his conquest of France as his compassionate self-mastery surpasses arrogant French pride, and his Crispin speech at Agincourt, inviting his men to courageous blood brotherhood, betokens a miracle victory, a victory largely over himself, for which the chronicles of Hall and Holinshed gave lavish aid. That this elaborate morality forms a compelling epic is affirmed by calling it the Henriade, worthy rival of Virgil's Aeneid, model for moral education. We can widen the scope of Shakespeare's epic by viewing it as 2 cycles, beginning with the 1590 First Henriade that captivated Elizabethan audiences with its ruthless vendettas, Jack Cade's sensational populism, Joan of Arc's witchcraft, the Talbots' thrilling patriotism, and Richard III as a mesmerizing antichrist. Shakespeare's 2 tetralogies, begun about 1590 and 1595, closely match the appearance of Spenser's 2 installments of the Faerie Queene. The catalyst for both, of course, was the miraculous defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. In the first installment of these epics in 1590, we see no apparent rivalry, only a stark contrast between Shakespeare's exuberant, vulgar populism and Spenser's formal praise of decorous heroes and soul maidens who surround an iconic Gloriana and mythic Arthur. By 1595, however, the celebrity of Spenser's poem had played on Shakespeare's mind with wondrous results. As Elizabeth's court awaited Spenser's second installment, Shakespeare slyly upstaged the reclusive Gloriana with a new Faerie Queene, Titania, equally mythic and magnificent, but now feistily outspoken, contesting her male consort, and most astonishing, fully exposed on stage. This comic send-up cleared the way for the best half of Shakespeare's Henriade. By flattering Robert Devereux as Oberon in Midsummer Night, then as Hal Henry V in the Henriade, Shakespeare challenged the epic vision and the appeal for patronage, not only of Spenser, but of Chapman, who sought Essex's favor by translating Homer's Iliad. Shakespeare also displaced Chapman, who had toyed with humor figures in plays of 1596 to 98, by superbly depicting the four great figures of Henry IV, Part 1, as the four humoral tempers: melancholic Henry, choleric Hotspur, phlegmatic Falstaff, sanguine Hal, thus epitomizing the four vectors of human nature within the English national identity. By basing his epic on such a dynamic metapsychology, Shakespeare profoundly upgraded the characters and plot of his earlier history cycle, thus overshadowing Chapman's and Johnson's merely whimsical humors and establishing a splendid rival for Spenser's epic. Part 3, Epic Center, the Avatar, that is, the hero as God. In his letter to Raleigh about the Fairy Queen, Spenser highlights the hero, divinely empowered to lead a nation in combat and in moral grandeur. By veiling the fatal adulteries in Malory's Morte d'Arthur, suppressing the unwitting incest that produced Mordred, replacing Guinevere with Gloriana, Spenser's epic renews the dream of an Arthuriad. Young Arthur's spiritual potential, apparent in his dazzling advent to Lady Una, is confirmed in his extraordinary divinely assisted victories in books 1 and 2. He defeats first Orgoglio, fleshly pride, then Maleager, fleshly mortality. But in the passional allegory of books 3 and 4, Arthur is distracted by Florimel, fleshly beauty, and displaced by chaste Britomart as the poem's moral touchstone, at least for a few legends. The third and culminating stage of Arthur's confusing descent into materiality is depicted in the sensory allegory of books 5 and 6, where he is over-lenient in Duessa's trial and unable to defeat disdain in book 6. Thus, although Arthur's moral power is always affirmed, he needs further education, namely in the schematically ascending virtues of books 7 through 12. The Fairy Queen's visionary architecture, as its title implies, is an epiphany of the miracle queen. As a complement to Shakespeare's male-centered Henriade, Spenser's epic is essentially a Glorianad, cleansing the legendary Arthur to commune with her transcendent glory. To depict his own type of epic avatar, Shakespeare likewise improves the chronicles, reforming a roguish prince into an iconic persona who begs comparison with Spenser's Gloriana and Arthur. Prodigality is deferred to Falstaff, as Hal in soliloquy vows to redeem time as a Christ-like king. Critics have long suspected over-neatness in Hal's coping with prodigality, rebellion, and usurpation, especially when he underscores his own role-playing. Exalting Henry V as a pattern of perfection surely flattered the Earl of Essex, but the project was undone by Devereux's revolt and beheading. With his hero unlaced, and with Spenser's untimely death removing his key rival, Shakespeare angrily turned epic on its head in subsequent plays. From this tragic vantage point, how well does Henry V exemplify supreme courage and wisdom? In some ways, he certainly improves on the willful heroes of classical epic, but does he match the spiritual seekers of medieval romance and pilgrimage? or the chastened avatars of the Fairy Queen? Above all, does Henry V know the depth of suffering and widening of conscience of the beleaguered heroes of Shakespeare's mature tragedies and romances? I've skipped the next section, which has to do with what really makes an epic avatar, and it contrasts the education of Arthur by Timon, whose name means honor in the Fairy Queen, and Hal's self-education in a tavern, etc. And also it contrasts them in gendering, whereas the Fairy Queen presents woman as a sapient authority and having combative power in Britomart and others. Shakespeare makes fun of women in the Henriade, which has been well treated by many good scholars. Finally, part 4, epic's goal, impaling or glorifying the body. Virgil, on his deathbed, asked that his Aeneid be burned. Was it dismay at dark aspects of Augustan rule, or discontent with reversing and revising Homer's epics, making a dour homecoming that resists passion and promotes endless war? Or was it a deeper self-disclaiming, like Chaucer's Retraction and Prospero's Drowned Book? Virgil's unease is surprising in that his epic for 2 millennia was a key to Western education. Do Spenser's and Shakespeare's epics match that success? That Spenser's epic is half finished shrouds its visionary goal and its legacy as a supreme fiction. Surely Northrop Frye was wrong to imagine Spenser content with the 6 books, and C.S. Lewis was right that the final 6 would have greatly surpassed them. Likewise, Shakespeare's Henriade was incomplete, for his testing of anointed rulers continued apace in darkening dimensions. The Henriade's optimism gives way to Julius Caesar's anxious warning, to Troilus and Cressida's fierce satire, and to the tragedy's disclosure of evils rooted not in foreign foes, but within the self-aggrandizing hero. In the late plays, as proud militancy is discredited and as woman's voice is enlarged, what happens to the goal of epic vision? The old epic touchstone, massive warfare, is called by Northrop Frye negative epic. It explodes in screaming havoc, and its signature ending has one leader impaled by another. Hector by Achilles, Turnus by Aeneas, Hotspur by Hal, Claudius by Hamlet, Julius Caesar by an entire senate, Coriolanus by a whole squadron, Mordred and Arthur by each other. This dark finale, ultimately skewering both combatants, defines epic by passionate revenge, by the shock of mortality and nothingness. Though singers like Homer do add a recuperative scene. But Milton's Paradise Lost mocks warfare and the satanic minds that embrace it. Resolution is not stabbing Satan, but transfixing Jesus on a cross, piercing all of his body, hands and feet, heart, even this thorn-pierced head. Spenser draws on this paradox in Prince Arthur's self-sacrificing combat with Orgoglio and Meleager, in Red Cross Knight, twice dying and being reborn, in battling the great dragon of his own sin, and most poignantly in the bleeding hearts of Una, Amavia, and Amoret, who by their greater innocence and their steadfast love magnify the Christ mystery. Positive epic, says Frye, lies in homecoming. The Odyssey partly resolves the errancy of war with Odysseus regaining his familial home. but only by a thrilling slaughter of suitors that pins us in Homeric reality. For Virgil, 1,000 years later, the meaning of home greatly expands as Aeneas guides his outcast tribe to form a vast empire based on stoic restraint and duty. Add another 1,000 years, and the Christian ethos of Dante, Spencer, and Milton expands home into heavenly paradise, with the old warfare a hellish travesty. This new quest for home is a far more complex struggle, for its wounds are finally embraced, and its bliss is not just a spouse's welcome, but a bond with all who share this home of spirits. We return at last to the blind singer and the goal of epic, a watchful mind trying to make sense of catastrophe, an avatar trying to become one with God. As epic scope widens its sixth stage, I once tried to divide the development of epic into stages from Homer up to Blake. Its sixth stage has Milton, Goethe, and Blake nearly achieving the supreme fiction. Two of them, Milton and Blake, build directly on the Fairy Queen, an epic so grand, even in its unfinished state, that Shakespeare did not stop trying to match its visionary scope. To achieve such a goal, even the two Henriettes were inadequate. T.S. Eliot said of Shakespeare, one of the greatest capacities of genius is the power of development. His later work must be understood through the earlier and the first through the last. It's the whole journey, not any one stage of it, that assures his place among the great. Shakespeare's epic avatar is not just Henry V, but an oddly protean figure. Hal morphs into Hamlet, darkens into Othello, dies and is reborn in Lear and Prospero. But the figure becomes compelling only in merging with Portia, Beatrice, Rosalind, Desdemona, Cleopatra, Hermione, Miranda. The Shakespearean avatar is, moreover, not sequestered in royalty, for it includes fools, laborers, and servants, many of them nameless. Even the dark antitypes, Iago and his self-negating kin, partly inform this remarkable figure as they are engaged and worked through. For Shakespeare, as for Spencer, this cumulative male and female avatar, the divine human, has so many faces that we need not marshal them all as if in some great epic catalog. Thank you.
Let's all unmute and clap. There used to be a clap function on here, but I can't seem to find it. That was excellent. Thank you. I very much enjoyed that. Our next speaker is John Wall from North Carolina State University, and his talk is titled Love at First Sight, the narrator's voice in Marlowe's Hero and Leander.
Thank you. I too want to add my thanks and appreciation to all the folks who so miraculously and so successfully transcended the challenges of this very peculiar year to have for us and help us to participate in a truly fine session of the Southeastern Renaissance Conference. And so without further ado, the narrative voice of Marlowe's Hero and Leander delights in expressing opinions about the events he recounts in his narrative, telling us how we see things or how we should see things or how we are inevitably going to see things. The most famous of these pronouncements is his belief that whoever loved, loved at first sight. The context in which this line appears in Hero and Leander suggests, however, that Marlowe wants us to receive the narrator's claims with some caution. This line appears right after the narrator has described for us Hero's and Leander's first sights of each other at a feast in Sestos dedicated to Venus's beloved Adonis, where we are told it chanced they each did each other spy. As a result, we are told, thence flew love's arrow with the golden head, and thus Leander was enamored, till with the fire that from his countenance blazed, relenting Hero's gentle heart was strook. Such force and virtue hath an amorous look. At this critical moment, the speaker digresses into a series of reflections on what has just happened, claiming that we, like Hero and Leander, have no choice in moments like this. Instead, according to the narrator, it lies not in our power to love or hate, for will in us is overruled by fate. So far, so good. To our speaker, whatever will be, will be. Leander cannot resist love's arrow, and Hero cannot escape the power of Leander's flaming gaze. But then the narrator builds on his claims for determinism in human relationships by shifting the arena for his fatalistic views from the world of interpersonal relationships to the world of track and field and the world of professional appraisal. He says, when two are stripped long ere the course begin, we wish that one should lose, the other win. And one especially do we affect of two gold ingots, like in each respect. The reason no man knows, let it suffice what we behold is censured by our eyes. From the narrative's perspective, therefore, all human beings evaluate everything they see. Further, all share the desire that one should lose, the other win, and the suspicion that if presented with two gold ingots like in each respect, we will find that one of them must be better than the other. Marlowe's narrator thus casts us as spectators, sharing with the narrator his understanding of human desire. In so doing, he invites us to contemplate Hero and Leander as we might athletes stripping for the race, or as those two gold ingots, seeking to identify which of them is the better and which the worse, which the winner and which the loser. In this context, we arrive at the line with which we started, that is, the rhetorical question, whoever loved that loved not at first sight, which of course does not follow at all from the narrator's previous discussion, because when you fall in love at first sight, you are Orlando and Rosalind, or Romeo and Juliet, or Titania and the donkey. You are not engaged in the comparative analysis of two gold ingots or the handicapping of contestants at a foot race. You are having the very disorienting experience of your whole world and the rest of your life reorganizing themselves around a complete stranger. So we perhaps may want to regard the narrator's running interpretive commentary on the story of Hero and Leander with suspicion. Nonetheless, my argument in this paper is that in the process of telling his tale, the narrator seeks to convince us of the truth of the claims he has just made, that even in matters of the heart, we interpret things comparatively and in terms of competition. He does this by putting us in interpretive positions that will lead us to think about what is happening in comparative terms. But I will also argue that Marlowe's poem offers us a glimpse of another way of thinking about these events, that instead of competition, we see signs of Hero's collaboration with Leander, suggesting they share a mutuality of longing rather than a relationship of predator and prey. In keeping with his advocacy of binary and comparative thinking, the narrator begins the poem by posing a series of opposites. First is the division of the world into two cities, the one Abydos, the other Sestos height, followed by his bringing Hero and Leander in view as opposites, female and male, clothed and unclothed. In so doing, however, the narrator reverses traditional expectations because Hero in this poem is clothed from head to toe and remains so, from her head with its myrtle wreath from whence her veil reached to the ground beneath, to the outside of her garments which were of lawn, the lining purple silk with gilt stars drawn, with wide sleeves green and kirtle blue. In contrast to his description of Hero, the narrator's description of Leander emphasizes Leander's blonde hair and his skin, which we are told is delicious meat to the taste. And unlike Hero, Leander has a good bit of skin on display, from his neck to his smooth breast, and his white belly, and then to his backbone, that heavenly path with many a curious dent that runs along his back. The narrator then makes much of Hero's chastity and of Leander's threat to it. She is Venus Nun, Leander's chaste hero, whom he flatters with the comparative claim that she is more beautiful than Venus herself. Yet even though Leander's words like sweet music enter Hero's ears, she turns aside and always cuts him off. Nevertheless, Leander persists, claiming that untouched women are untuned golden strings, that maids are nothing then without the sweet society of men. In Leander's view, Hero will be truly Venus Nun only when she abandons fruitless cold virginity in favor of Venus' sweet rites. In the company of our narrator, therefore, we have been brought into a world in which the satisfaction of a wide range of human sexual desires is not only acceptable, but in fact expresses both the true nature of erotic passion and the narrator's definition of a good story. Which brings us to perhaps the most curious feature of this poem. In spite of the fact that Leander can talk easily of Venus' sweet rites, which Hero is neglecting, and the fact that Hero and Leander live in a world in which a wide range of sexual arrangements and practices are graphically displayed, where the gods in sundry shapes commit heady riots, incests, rapes, where Jove slyly steals from his sister's bed to dally with a dallian Ganymede. In spite of all this, when Hero and Leander finally have the chance to spend some personal time with each other, we discover that neither of them knows the basic mechanics of sexual relationships. They kiss, they snuggle in each other's arms, yet Hero is, we are told, with love unacquainted, even though she has previously told Leander to come hither. But he too is a novice, still rude in love and raw, who knows not what she meant. The narrator thus switches terms on us again, inviting us to consider Hero and Leander, each in turn both knowledgeable in matters of love and unacquainted or rude in love. If either were truly knowledgeable, we might be tempted to see the knowledgeable one as manipulative, as determined to win a contest. Presumably in accord with the male role in the courtly love tradition, Leander would be the knowledgeable one, with ignorant as well as innocent Hero as the better choice among young women and the potential victim of Leander's pursuit. But both Hero and Leander are, from moment to moment, both informed and uninformed about the kind of story they are in and what their roles are to be and what possible futures lie before them. Which brings us once more to our role in this poem. What do we know, and when do we know it? Over the next section of the poem, the narrator plays with the meaning of language and plays with us as well, through his creating for us a reading experience in which we at once believe we know what is going on and then discover that we are as ignorant as Hero and Leander. The narrator does this by moving us through a series of short episodes, each one of which creates expectations for us about what is happening between the couple, expectations that are soon surprisingly frustrated. In the first of these episodes, Leander arrives at Hero's door, where Hero faints at the sight of him. In response, he kisses her. She revives, then leads him deeper into her domicile, finally dropping her painted fan of curled plumes in the hope that she might train Leander therewithal. But this narrative fragment ends when Leander, being a novice, knew not what she meant, so he stops, returns home, and sends her a letter instead. The second episode begins with Hero's reply, which gives Leander hope to scale the beauteous fort wherein the liberal Graces locked their wealth. When Leander to her tower got by stealth, he discovers that wide open stood the door, finds that Hero has spread the board with roses strewed the room. When he arrives, we are told, "Oh, who can tell the greeting these greedy lovers had at their first meeting?" The narrator then claims that he asked, she gave, and nothing was denied. Both to each other quickly were affied. Look, how their hands, so were their hearts united, and what he did, she willingly requited. But even though nothing was denied, it is still not too late for Hero to repent, to turn aside and lament as if her name and honor had been wronged. The third episode begins when Hero has another change of heart. Now waxed she jealous lest his love abated, fearing her own thoughts made her to be hated. Therefore unto him hastily she goes, and like light Selmachus her body throws upon his bosom, where with yielding eyes she offers up herself a sacrifice to slake her anger if he were displeased. Oh, what God would not therewith be appeased? As in the prior episode, the narrator again offers us the possibility of interpreting this language to mean that Hero's and Leander's relationship has reached a new level of intimacy, an interpretation encouraged by the next line of the poem, in which we are told, like Aesop's cock, this jewel Leander enjoyed. Yet the next line revises one or more of the interpretations we might have made of what we just read. And as a brother with his sister toyed, supposing nothing else was to be done, now he her favor and goodwill had won. At this point in the poem, if we remember the narrator's early reference to Jove slyly stealing from his sister's bed to dally with the Dalian Ganymede, some of those interpretations might yet apply. But before we have time to ponder the matter, the narrator hurries us back to Leander, rude in love and raw, who long dallying with Hero nothing saw that might delight him more. So they continue to snuggle, since he suspected some amorous rites or other were neglected, until Leander experiences a gentle pleasing heat which taught him all that elder lovers know. At this point, the narrator switches from description of events to the nature of love language, or better, the language lovers use. As in plain terms, yet cunningly he crave it, love always makes those eloquent that have it, she with a kind of grant him, put him by it. The narrator's description highlights language's capacity for both plain and cunning words and expressions, as well as the capacity of experience to teach all that elder lovers know. In the meantime, however, the narrator is having fun, leading us to wonder what it means in this context, and how the narrative still winds up repeating the same ending. And ever as he thought himself most nigh it, like to the tree of Tantalus she fled, and seeming lavish, saved her maidenhead. By following these twists and turns in the narrator's language, we join him in the company of those who take pleasure in knowing about things that others don't. We may think we are superior to Hero and Leander in our command of interpretation, but in doing so, we must recognize that we too are regarding people as objects of desire and human interactions as games staged for our enjoyment. Which brings us to the end of the poem and to the narrator's indirect way of telling us that Hero and Leander have at last figured things out. Leander now, like Theban Hercules, entered the orchard of the Hesperides. We are told that Hero enjoys what is happening. Every kiss to her was as a charm, and now she wished this night were never done, and sighed to think upon the approaching sun, for much it grieved her that the bright daylight should know the pleasure of this blessed night. Yet the narrator takes a contrary view of Hero's response. Switching from Hero's to Leander's perspective, the narrator now views Hero as a silly poor maiden who at Leander's mercy was. Love is not pity, not full of pity, as men say, but deaf and cruel, where he means to pray. We do, however, end the poem with a sense of Hero's vulnerability. This is, after all, a narrative of the undressing of Hero, moving from her being fully clothed at the beginning to her pleasant state of being all naked. In both cases, she is objectified. Early in the poem, she is offered as one sitting on Apollo's burning throne for men to gaze upon. And at the end, her body is described as to Leander's sight displayed, his admiring eyes more pleasure took than dis on heaps of gold fixing his look. If we accept the narrator's viewpoint, therefore, we must conclude that along with his delight at seeing Hero nude, Leander is also assessing whether her appearance measures up to whatever he might have imagined when he saw her clothed. Yet our narrator, in spite of himself, has provided us with evidence that supports a counter-reading of the poem. In this version of the story, Hero and Leander is about two young people who discover that adolescence opens possibilities of experience for which childhood had not equipped them. So they both approach their first experience of adult sexual desire with a combination of eagerness and reluctance. Not to mention the possibility that Hero's virginity is a condition of her employment at Venus Temple, so that if she does enter into a sexual relationship with Leander, she might well have to find another job. This reading of the story is supported by Hero's having been a much more active partner in the deepening intimacy of their relationship with Leander than the narrator's version would allow. From the beginning, Hero is as interested in Leander as he is in her. Hero suggests he come thither to her tower by the sea. Hero writes Leander encouraging letters, leaves the door open, strews her bower with roses. Hero responds to Leander's holding her hand by uniting her heart to his, and what he did, she willingly requited. Nor does Leander's aggressiveness seem nearly as determined to succeed as the narrator claims it should be. After all, Leander always respects Hero's wishes when she resists his advances. Which brings us to Marlowe's poem's last scene. Hero wakes first to a moment of divided attention, distributed among memories of the pleasure of this blessed night, concerned that the sun will see them in each other's arms, awareness that she is no longer a virgin, and uncertainty about how to frame her look or speak to Leander. So she plans to slip out of bed and leave him there alone. But he, now alert, clinged her so about that mermaid-like unto the floor she slid, one half appeared, the other half was hid. A truly embarrassing moment, surely, to be feeling awkward on this first morning after, and suddenly find oneself on one's bottom, on the floor, tangled in the sheets. So, like Venus in Botticelli's painting, Hero, blushing, rises out of the sea of bed linen, the glow of her body revealing herself all naked to his sight displayed. At this point, a narrator, true to his argument that the world is all about winners and losers, depicts Leander gazing at Hero from the perspective of a winner, taking pleasure at the sight of his prize. But we also get nature's response. Thinking the glow of Hero's body is a sign of the approaching dawn, Apollo's golden harp began to sound forth music to the ocean, whereupon watchful Hesperus no sooner heard, but he the bright day-bearing car prepared and ran before as harbinger of light, and with his flaring beams mocked ugly night. Marlowe ends the poem with night's response. Night, whose time of rule is cut short by the chain of events set in motion by Hero's rising, is overcome with anguish, shame, and rage, so she danged down to hell her loathsome carriage. But we do not get Hero's reaction. Is she like night, overcome with anguish, shame, and rage at losing her contest with Leander for the prize of her virginity? Perhaps, but she does not burrow under the covers. Is she like Venus in Botticelli's painting, rising up in celebration of her discovery of the possibilities of adulthood? Perhaps, but what about the second thought she was having only a few lines ago, when her first response was to slip away to hide in a corner? And what about our response? Do we share the narrator's belief that Leander has won and Hero has lost, with all that he has taught us about the consequences of accepting such a view, the cynicism, the determinism, the objectification, the potential for cruelty in human relationships? Or can we find a place outside the narrator's world of the inevitable and predetermined from which we can be skeptical of his reading? Perhaps imagine other ways of appreciating human relationships, or perhaps even imagine a future for Hero and Leander other than the tragic one we know from Musaeus' version. We, with Leander, now gaze at Hero, or imagine being gazed at like Hero, or with Hero gazing back at Leander. This is the point to which Marlowe has brought us, this point of reflective self-awareness. And if this kind of an ending was good enough for Marlowe, then it's good enough for me.
Excellent. There's so much great overlap here, thinking about epic and lyric and Shakespeare and Spenser. Such good stuff. Questions? I have some questions, but go, please, Jim. And you need to unmute. There we go.
This one is for Robin. Robin, you talk about the education of Hal in Henry IV, and I'd like to ask you about Act 2, Scene 4, the Francis scene. I was teaching it the other day, and my students thought it was a little funny, but they thought it was a little mean too. And you know, how do you see that as bringing out his epic qualities?
That's a tough one. And I think it's a source of much of the deep criticism that is directed often to Hal. But I guess the best reading that I've read is that the joke that's played on Francis is a parody of what is happening to Hal himself, a person who is not keeping time properly, who is about to have to face his father at the center of the play, and which is sort of the basis of all that's happening in that marvelous, lengthy scene 4, just before the third act. So I wish I could remember the lovely terms that a really fine critic used for the parallel between what he's doing to Francis and what he is acknowledging indirectly about himself, of not being properly yet prepared.
Isn't
And
that
the whole-
Bevington? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I think that's Bevington, and he talks about the prodigal son plays.
I bet that's it. Yeah.
Well, I could follow up with a question to Robin. Robin, that was a brief epic in your paper. It was marvelously capacious and yet, very, very compact. How would you relate what you were just talking about and what Jim's question was seeking to the old sort of Bildungsroman argument about Hal, that this is the Hal I prefer personally, the Hal who is actually somewhat shallow and self-directed early on and rather smug, who nevertheless in the course of these stories gains some insight, although how much, and that of course is, does he rise to the kind of epic personal greatness that you're seeking? Could you relate the questions of epic to the questions of personal, spiritual and character development?
Yeah, it's, I think I got a bibliography of Henry V and counted the number of positive and negative treatments of Hal Henry. And they are quickly moving toward the negative in the last 4 or 5 decades. But Hal still, I think, charms us just as Chaucer does with his characters. It is, even though Spenser, in giving us, in replacing Merlin as the educator of Arthur in the old legends, Merlin turns over Arthur to Timon, whose name means honor, and no doubt who represents what Spenser himself got educated by in the leaders of Merchant Taylor School and then of Cambridge. But with Hal, it seems to me Shakespeare, as he so often does, is mocking and parodying in the figure of Falstaff. He is mocking what about the whole tradition of educating a prince. Major figures like Sir Thomas Eliot and forgotten the other, and Erasmus and one other. And it's almost as if Shakespeare has in mind, this is what should be done to educate a prince, but here we have this renegade Hal, and so we're just going to remake him. And every major character in Henry IV Part 1, all of the 4 major characters are radically different than history presents them. They're different in age, they're different in every which way. And Shakespeare is just simply giving us a Hal who announces after the opening scene in the tavern that he is just withholding his true greatness. That, that's just out of nowhere. That's Shakespeare giving us history, as Spenser says, that might best be. But so in other words, I don't have a good answer to your question, but the whole treatment of the key aspect of educating the prince, educating the avatar, educating the godlike figure who really can match up with Aeneas and the other great figures of the past, is both Shakespeare and Spenser are just taking so much for granted. The way Spenser transforms Arthur and the way Shakespeare transforms Hal into something that would make the basis of epic, and I mean a truly supreme epic, is what I was struggling to try to express.
Well said. Other questions? Well, I
have a question for Jesse. Really wonderful paper. Thank you so much. And I wondered about, because you present the more Marian aspect of Belphoebe in the early episodes and her comforting and healing of Timaeus, but how would you deal with the Marian comparison in terms of the tragedies that happen in the Timaeus-Belphoebe relationship in two subsequent legends?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that the Marian source is only one source that Spenser uses, and that, you know, there is, I guess, in Christianity, the idea of sort of a noble tragedy, or the idea that all of these events ultimately end up at a crucifixion or an experience of Our Lady of Sorrow. So I think that definitely as the Fairy Queen goes on, especially in the two cantos of Immutability, I think that there is an underlying sort of pessimism that erupts. And I think especially the figure of Elizabeth is kind of dethroned when Cynthia the Moon is challenged. And then there's that scene with Faunus as well, spying on Diana. I think that definitely that there is an undercurrent of pessimism that ultimately erupts there. So I think that, you know, Spenser is drawing from, and this is kind of like the argument given by some of the critics that I drew from there, especially Gary Waller, is that they're sort of like traces. They're just little flecks of the Virgin Mary that exist and persist on to the early modern period. And, you know, I know that's kind of silly to say in a certain sense that Spenser himself may not have been fully aware of it as well, if he's writing a work that's meant to be essentially combative toward Catholicism.
Yeah. Thank you.
Deneen? You want to yeah, there you go.
There we go. I'm not sure. I'll try to turn this into a question, but it'll start out as a convergence of thoughts. And I guess this is directed mostly at Robin and John, but Jesse too, because what I'm wondering about is incompletion and its relationship to education. In particular, John and Robin, you both mounted lovely arguments about the education of the characters within the poem, within the text, but also sort of spilling over that boundary into, in your case, John, the narrator's sort of sly folding the reader into that process of incompletion. And Robin, in your case, the incompletion of genre, right? All of which brings me back to Heather and bethinking yesterday. I told you, Heather, that once you got me started thinking about that, it wasn't likely to end soon, and it hasn't. So I guess what I want to ask broadly, and answer in any way you like, has to do with the consequences of incompletion as you are seeing it unfold in these texts. Is it the case that incompletion is that which is not yet known, or that which cannot be known? In either case. So take it in, I don't know which of you might wish to begin, but I'll leave it up to you.
Well, I will give it a shot and say that I'm not sure that Marlowe's Hero and Leander is incomplete.
Oh no, I was thinking in terms of the education, not so much the text, but the idea of education. of what they know. I think you said at one point, John, what did they know and when did they know it, in sort of translating that. So I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I didn't mean so much the text. That's more Robin's argument. But I was thinking in terms of an incomplete knowledge.
Well, I guess in traditional terms, in terms of, I mean, Leander don't know what they're doing, but somehow they fumble into discovering what adult lovers know.
What elder lovers knew. Yeah.
So so there is a sense of completion. They have had now a full initiation into adult sexuality.
Right. But if I understood you correctly, you were also suggesting that the question of Hero's agency, and our interpretation of it, and forgive me if I got this wrong, but it seemed to me that our interpretation of that in some ways depended on how far we imagine that education going, right? So is it that she truly, as you said, as one possibility, welcomed and requited all that Leander did, or was that sort of destabilized by her trying to get out of the bed and getting tangled up in the covers and that other impulse? I'm just wondering, from the interpretive point of view, from the reader's position that you kept emphasizing, the degree to which that process of incomplete knowledge might influence where we come down on our understanding of someone like Hero's response to this entire process of coming to know.
I came to this paper primarily as a result of teaching it for a very long period of time and sort of having to work my way through all of the body language and all of the references and eventually coming to recognize the very traditional maleness. This is, in some sense, locker room talk. This is very traditional male, the kinds of stories that men tell each other as a kind of male bonding, and it totally excludes the female. The female in those kinds of stories is an object. And I was uncomfortable with that. I remember at one point thinking, this is a kind of story. I imagine, I'm at a academic conference back in the old days when we could have one in a hotel, and the sessions were over, and I was decided to go down to the bar and have a drink. And while I was there, I got into conversation with this guy who tells me this story, and I don't know him and he doesn't know me, but over the course of hearing the story told, I become aware that I'm being invited to assume a position in relationship to the characters in the story, and therefore to reach certain conclusions about it. I increasingly found disturbing, and I'm still on that journey. So in some ways, for me, the tradition that this is an incomplete poem, it doesn't tell the whole story of Hero and Leander, but it's really a kind of meditation on Musaeus and that story. That it's that the incompleteness is a kind of, to the extent to which the narrative isn't complete, but the experience is complete, that something has occurred, knowledge has been acquired, knowledge in the bodily sense, but also in the cognitive sense, and that's for now, that's as far as we need to go.
Well, that's a helpful distinction. I mean, I keep borrowing from Heather, I'm sorry, but it's such a useful tool. Maybe what I'm sort of zeroing in on is moments in which, even after knowledge has been acquired, both bodily and cognitively, for Hero, she bethinks herself of what she's coming to learn, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. You don't know what you're left with this stage of a story, which has the potential to be the story of a lifetime or not, depending on the choices that they make. as this day proceeds. And so, yes, there is an open-endedness to the story, but the story has brought them somewhere and brought us somewhere. And the place to which it has brought us is a kind of skepticism with the kind of language and the kind of language play that the narrator engages in as he both tells the story but also comments on it. I mean, I personally don't believe that the inevitability of these very deterministic ideas. We do have agency, and that's part of what it seems to me that's really where the poem ends, is with we have whether we do it or not, we have the opportunity to recognize that they have agency and we do too, and that they have gotten to this place through a kind of mutual journey and with stops and starts. But they have now made the transition. They have come of age. They have now made the transition from early to late adolescence, or from childhood to adulthood, and that's a long way to go, and there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, Robin, did you have something to add to that? I have a comment too.
Oh, you go first.
Well, I was just thinking that it's difficult for me to read Hero and Leander as a poem about like education, because I really read it as a poem about poetry. And I really love that this authorial voice is something that you're focusing on, because I'm wondering, I'm trying to turn this into a question. So I'm wondering, how much is this focus on desire and bodies here a focus on objects, and how poems are created out of objects, so to speak? And yeah, I don't really know how to word that properly, but is there more that you can say about that? And also I wanted to add too that let's not forget, when we're thinking about epic, that Hero and Leander is an epyllion, which is a small epic, so that it should share some sort of epic characteristics as well. So go on. I don't know if you Robin, go ahead.
My thought was about John's paper, which I very much enjoyed. I've always wanted to hear a really good study of Whoever Loved That Loved Not at First Sight, which is something I think is sort of a load of crap. And Marlowe and Marlowe's influence on Shakespeare seems to me somewhat profound and yet limited. It seems to me all of Marlowe's work is focused on the physical above all, and his characters seem to me almost by definition limited, incomplete characters. So that if we go in Shakespeare from Romeo and Juliet to Othello and Desdemona to Antony and Cleopatra, we see these deepening stages of incredible personal and social consciousness that is just not in Marlowe. So the idea of the incompleteness in Marlowe, it seems to me, is a physical incompleteness and sort of touching on our erotic hormones and so on, but not taking us much beyond that, although doing it, as you say, in such an extraordinary rhetorical way. And with regard to Spenser, so much has been written about the completeness or incompleteness of the Fairy Queen. And books have been written about the fact that, well, nothing is complete. Nothing could be complete. It's necessarily unfinished. And again, I think that's a load of crap, because it seems to me Spenser was so brilliant that even when he was oppressed at the middle of his epic, he was able to clearly the ending of book 6 is very fragmented, and there are all sorts of interruptions and problems, but the mutability cantos provide a brilliant coda ending because he knew that's all he had left. And he was able to do that. When the ending, to me, the most brilliant ending that shows the full extent of Spenser's brilliance is the ending of book 3. That amazing sequence in the last couple cantos of book 3, where Britomart does so much and goes through stages, and at the very end is watching Amoret and Scudamore form a hermaphrodite image, sort of fulfilling what should be in Marlowe, and yet is herself, as in the wonderful recent book by Judith Anderson, which is mostly about Britomart, saying Britomart is a character. She is not just an allegorical figure. And I so agree with that. And it seems to me it is the ending of book 3 that shows Spenser using Britomart to hold out to Queen Elizabeth, not just a Belphoebe image, but a combative, androgynous knight like Britomart. My gosh, what's he doing? And he does it so brilliantly. So Spenser's ability, even under pressure, to bring things to closure, to end book 1 with that amazing heavenly visions of the betrothal, and to end book 2 with the bower of bliss, the absolute opposite, and to end book 3 in this marvelous way of creating a character like Britomart. Closure, closure, closure. Spenser is he just dazzles us with closure. So to say that the Fairy Queen is just absolutely unfinished because it could not be finished, I think is really ignoring our responsibility to try to figure out, where was Spenser going to begin with? Why did he make such an impact on Milton and on Blake? And that's what obviously has consumed me to try to figure out. And obviously I haven't fully figured it out, but I do believe that Spenser was an amazing person for closure.
Well, it reminds me in some ways also of Kevin's point, I think yesterday, about fragmentation, about natural histories, reading in particularity. But I'm sorry, we're probably out of time.
Yeah, we are at time here.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I saw that Fran wanted to
finish your thought. Yeah, or Fran, sorry.
I'd
Fran.
rather Fran.
I was just going to say, I loved John's paper because he gave us multiple readings. He gave us the audience's point of view and made that explicit, but he also changed the level. I mean, when he was talking about the simple teenagers toward the end, that was the way you talk to students as opposed to the way you talk to high-level academics. And I absolutely thought that was amazing, John. I wish I could write that well. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just to continue the epic, my experience is that if you really want to find the Marlovian influence in the epic, in the world of epic, the person to turn to is Milton. Marlowe is Milton's dark angel. He's everywhere. He's echoed. He's quoted. He's paraphrased. So I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you to everyone. I think we have lunchtime for an hour, and we are reconvening at 1:15 for the business meeting. So we hope everybody can join us for that.
And I would just jump in and say, for those who can't join us, thank you. We understand if you're not coming back. We hope you do, but if not, thank you for joining us for the conference. And please do.
John?
Yeah, hey, Rob. Hey, Robin.
I read recently an article that Louis Martz wrote before he died about the influence on Milton of Ovid.
Uh-huh.
And I think it related also to what you're saying about the
Yeah.
importance of Marlowe
Yeah, yeah.
and Milton. And both of those hit me as a revelation, because I've thought of Milton much more a different way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love to be able to chat with you more about that sometime.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yes. So let's make that happen.
I hope so.
Yes, indeed.
I hope we can just get beyond this pandemic stuff. Yeah, very sad to not be close to people again.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I
Thank you for your marvelous overview of so many of the issues and teasing out relationships between Shakespeare and Spencer that I had. I sat here listening, and I thought, oh yes, of course, that's right. Yes. Yes. So thank you, Robin. We're making this is the second time that you and I have closed out the part of this conference, and it works out well.
Well, yeah, I wish there'd been more time at that other conference for us to chat afterward, and that didn't happen. But yeah, your talk on King Lear that time was just really one of the best things I've ever heard, just on Lear. And of course, I was trying to do Epiphany.
Yeah.
So I was coming at it from a different direction.
And yes, yeah. Well, it was almost a L'Allegro in Il Penseroso there, actually, in a very, very nice way.
Yeah.
And in Il Penseroso, there is a direct allusion to Hero and Leander.
Ah.
In the description, when Milton says, talks about how he's in the tower, he watches in the tower, and he describes about hearing the sea, and the other elements of that description are very, very close parallels and echoes of Marlowe's in Hero and Leander, when the narrator tells us about Hero tells us about where she lives, and invites Leander to come visit her. Gives an erotic charge to Il Penseroso that I had not recognized before, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that already written up by someone?
Well, I wrote it up. I think I read it. I think I did a paper which included that comment at SRC once several years ago.
Okay.
I'm getting too old to remember. Yeah, we have, Robin, we have done this for a while, and it has been and continues to be a wonderful way to spend one's time.
Yeah. It's a great conference.
I remember once walking into the first floor of Tompkins Hall and running into two of my colleagues, and some subject came up, and I said something that was an allusion to something in Shakespeare, and one of the other people said, followed up to it with an allusion from something in American literature, and the other guy came up with something from modern English literature. And I said, we have all spent about 30 or 40 years getting to the point where we could have the conversation that we just had.
Yeah.
Very good.
It's nice when it happens.
Yeah. Well, we thank you so much, and we will look forward to meeting again.
We will find a time.
We will indeed. Thank you. Great. David.
So long.
Give our regards to Suzanne.
Oh, yes, I certainly will.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll do it. I'll give that greeting to her.
So Robin,
Yes.
I have remembered those times when you and John have closed down the conference, and I kind of think of you as the cleanup hitters. And you hit another one out of the park. You and John.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to see you all again.
Yeah, we sure miss seeing you in person, you and Suzanne.
Oh yes. It's not being able to touch people. It's just a terrible thing.
But we'll get through this. We'll get through this.
I think so. Yes, if we survive November 3rd.
Yeah,
Yes.
indeed. But I trust that we will. So.
Yes. Okay. See you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hi, Helen. I just came
You're
back to
muted.
check and see. Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
wait,
I
I'm
was just
sorry.
going to turn off
Hang on.
the live stream if everyone was finished with their conversation.
Deneen,
Yes,
sorry.
that's okay. I was just I came back to turn off the live stream if everybody was finished with their conversation.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Shall I end the meeting or were you talking with someone as well?
No, I was, I think I just was typing in just a reminder that we have a separate Zoom meeting.
Oh, that's wise.
So I guess maybe just for Dave, because I think he's the only one who may still be on here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
Maybe
see
he
that now.
will have just heard that.
Presumably.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here, but I'm heading off. So.
Okay. Well, I just didn't want to cut it off midstream.
No. Yep. So if you do come back to the business meeting, Dave, there's a separate Zoom room for that with a password. So go back to the invite and you'll find that information.
Sounds good. All right, good.
Thanks.
Well, it's good to see everybody, even though we can't stand around and talk. That's
Yes.
the thing I miss. And no banquet. I miss that.
Oh yeah, we had plans. We'll get you
I
next
bet you
time. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Okay.
Here, hopefully. Bye.